A tunnel beneath the frozen edge of the world. Not a metaphor. Not a rumor. A real proposal. Studied, revised, abandoned. And then quietly brought back again. A $65 billion plan to carve through ice, rock, and darkness, stretching from Russia toward the United States. It sounds like science fiction, but the idea refuses to disappear. That alone should make you pause. And right now it's facing a problem that money, technology, and ambition may not be able to overcome. At first glance, this looks like an engineering story. A megaproject. A tunnel. An extreme environment. That's how it's usually framed. It's also where most explanations stop. But that framing misses the point. This tunnel doesn't exist because moving people or cargo between Russia and America is especially efficient. It exists because infrastructure creates power. Permanent power. And permanence changes behavior. Once that power is anchored in place, it becomes very difficult to reverse. This isn't a story about transportation. It's a story about control. On paper, the proposal is deceptively simple. A rail tunnel beneath the Bering Strait, linking eastern Russia to Alaska, creating the first direct land connection between Eurasia and North America. Freight trains could move across continents without ships. Supply chains could bypass congested sea routes. Entire economies could be reshaped by a single line of steel. Supporters describe it as visionary. Critics describe it as reckless. Russia describes it as unfinished business. That choice of words matters. And that persistence is the first real clue that something bigger is at work. This would not be a symbolic project. It would be one of the largest infrastructure efforts ever attempted by any nation. More than 65 miles underwater, longer than the Channel Tunnel between England and France, deeper than most civilian tunnels ever built. Construction would stretch across decades. Maintenance would never truly end. Failure wouldn't be inconvenient. It wouldn't just be expensive. It would be catastrophic. And that's before the ground itself gets involved. So the question becomes unavoidable. Why attempt this now? Because something changed. Quietly. Costs began rising faster than projections. Engineering language became more cautious. Public timelines stopped appearing in briefings. On the surface, nothing looked wrong. But projects don't go quiet when things are going well. Beneath that calm language, scientists and engineers were seeing something unsettling. Not political risk, physical instability. The ground itself was becoming unreliable. The Bering Strait is not stable ground. It lies between tectonic plates. Earthquakes are common. The seabed shifts unpredictably. But seismic activity isn't the most dangerous variable. Temperature is. Cold doesn't just slow things down. It changes behavior. Permafrost, ground frozen solid for thousands of years, is beginning to thaw. As it melts, it loses structural strength. Foundations sink. Supports twist. Stress fractures appear where none were expected. Across the Arctic, buildings are already collapsing because the ground beneath them is no longer what it used to be. Nothing fails immediately out here. Now imagine anchoring a multi-billion-dollar tunnel into that same environment. This isn't a single engineering challenge. It's a moving target. To deal with that instability, Russian engineers proposed countermeasures. Flexible tunnel joints designed to absorb seismic movement. Advanced steel alloys engineered to remain ductile in extreme cold. Segmented construction methods meant to isolate failures before they spread. On diagrams, the solutions look elegant, modular, controlled. On diagrams, almost everything does. Arctic engineering doesn't fail all at once. It fails quietly. A joint that performs perfectly for 10 years can weaken in the 11th. A seal that holds under laboratory conditions can degrade under salt, pressure, and temperature cycling. Small deviations compound. This is where time becomes the real enemy. And because the tunnel would run beneath the sea, inspection alone becomes a challenge. Every repair requires access through extreme conditions, often during narrow seasonal windows. In other words, the tunnel wouldn't just need to survive construction, it would need to survive time. Building it would require moving enormous amounts of equipment into one of the most remote regions on Earth. Heavy drilling machines, concrete segments, power systems, life support infrastructure for crews. Much of it would need to travel thousands of miles through terrain with limited roads, limited ports, and limited rescue capacity. Workers would operate in months of darkness. Storms could shut down progress for weeks. Temperatures could disable machinery in minutes. At this scale, delays don't stack, they multiply. Even routine operations become high risk. And when the tunnel finally reaches land on the Russian side, it doesn't connect to a major city. It opens into vast Siberian wilderness. Hundreds of miles of frozen ground would still need rail lines, monitoring systems, and maintenance crews. The tunnel is only the beginning. This isn't a single project. It's an entire Arctic transportation ecosystem built where almost nothing currently exists. At this point, the project sounds irrational. Unstable ground, extreme costs, endless maintenance. That's usually where megaprojects stop. This one doesn't. And that's the clue. When a project ignores conventional logic, it's usually serving a different purpose. The tunnel isn't being pursued because it's easy. It's being pursued because it changes the map. Infrastructure reshapes geography. Once something exists, policy adjusts. Trade routes shift. Military planning recalibrates. Even the attempt forces recalculation. Russia isn't testing feasibility. It's asserting intent. The Arctic is warming faster than any other region on Earth. As ice retreats, new shipping routes are emerging. Shorter paths connecting Asia, Europe, and North America. Routes that bypass traditional choke points. Routes that reduce transit times by weeks. Russia controls more Arctic coastline than any other nation. And beneath that coastline lies immense wealth. Oil, natural gas, rare earth minerals critical to modern technology and defense systems. That's when the tunnel stops being the point. It isn't about passengers. It's about anchoring influence at the center of a future trade corridor. China already understands this. It refers to these routes as the Polar Silk Road. For Russia, the tunnel represents leverage. Economic, political, strategic. Not movement, position. Eventually, geopolitics caught up. International sanctions reshaped funding structures almost overnight. Western contractors withdrew quietly. Specialized machinery became difficult, then impossible to replace. The tone of official communication changed. Detailed timelines disappeared. Budgets stopped being itemized. Risk assessments became summaries. Notice what stops being said. Independent analysts raise concerns about underestimated seismic instability. And there was a critical unknown. Even if Russia completed its side of the tunnel, there was no binding commitment from the United States to ever connect. A tunnel built halfway beneath the sea is not a bridge. It's a liability, unless it serves another purpose. So why continue? Because megaprojects aren't always built to be completed. Sometimes they're built to declare intent. Backing out isn't neutral. The tunnel functions as a signal to investors, to rivals, to planners thinking decades ahead. Russia's Arctic strategy doesn't depend on a single tunnel. It depends on momentum, ports, rail lines, icebreakers, military installations. Each project reinforces the same message: presence, persistence, continuity. Infrastructure creates facts. Once those facts exist, others adjust around them. At that point, stopping sends a louder message than continuing. Maybe one day trains will pass beneath the Bering Sea, linking continents that once faced each other across frozen water. Or maybe the tunnel will never be completed. But completion was never the sole objective. Shipping routes are already shifting north. Arctic infrastructure is expanding. Strategic calculations are being rewritten in real time. The tunnel isn't a promise of connection. It's a declaration of presence. Russia isn't trying to reach America. It's anchoring itself to the future of the Arctic. And in geopolitics, being early, being persistent, and being impossible to ignore often matters far more than being finished.